hope everyone is doing well. This is the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour. I'm Yves Engler coming to you from Tiohtià:ke, which has long been a meeting place of various First Nations, otherwise known as Montreal. And Canadian Foreign Policy Hour is a critical look at Canada's role abroad. Been going on about 120, I think, maybe two and a quarter years of this weekly update on Canada's foreign policy. First thing, there's more stories about just the climate emergency that we're in. Story about the temperatures in the Great Barrier Reef hit the highest level in 400 years. And of course, Canada is a per capita one of the highest emitters of greenhouse gas emissions in the world. So an outsized contributor to the destabilization of our ability to live on this planet. Mining Watch has a post about the campaigning from social movements in Colombia against the ISDS, interstate dispute settlement process, which is basically the ability of corporations, specifically mining companies, to sue local governments for lost profits. And Colombia has come under assault on this front by Canadian mining companies, a whole bunch of outstanding suits worth billions of dollars. Some of them have been, fortunately, have been won by the Colombian government, mostly over ecological concerns, and Canadian mining companies suing over the government stepping in to protect important ecosystems. The Venezuela issue is continuing to get some attention. In the Globe and Mail, Andrew Coyne has a piece titled "Other Countries Have Taken a Clear Stand on Venezuela. Why hasn't Canada?" And Coyne, who's of course also with the CBC commentator, he starts off by saying this election in Venezuela is the most blatant example of an election manipulation ever, or one of the most blatant ever. In fact, it's not even the most, even if you were to believe the claims, which are very doubtful. There's some good stuff on Venezuela analysis looking at, in fact, how difficult it would be to mess with the numbers and how reliable of a electronic and other electoral system Venezuela has. But even if you believed the claims of the opposition, which are very dubious, they've just like posted a bunch of sheets on a website and claimed it's the data from the different polling stations. There's absolutely no a form of like check to what they've published online. Anyways, but even if you were to believe all of that, just 2 weeks ago, Paul Kagame in Rwanda had a far more blatant election manipulation where he got 99% of the vote, and the Canadian government basically went along with it. So Andrew Coyne making this claim about Venezuela is just like, it's just so transparently absurd. But this is Andrew Coyne for you. This is the leading thought maker, commentator in our country. I think it was in the National Post, they had a piece titled "Maduro Cements Dictatorship," and in the piece, they say that those same countries should recreate an international coalition similar to the one active after Maduro's theft of the 2018 presidential election, that isolates Maduro and his loyalists. So they're not even hiding it. They're just saying, like, let's go right back to the Lima Group, the Juan Guaido affair, and that worked out so well. That was so successful. Let's just repeat that endeavor. Fortunately, it doesn't actually seem like there's pickup for this in Washington, or for that matter in Ottawa. But the Conservatives are pushing it. Michael Chong, the Conservative foreign critic, he has a letter he posted, "My letter to Minister Jolie, formally calling on her to, quote, recognize the opposition won the Venezuelan election, cut off all contact with Maduro's authoritarian representatives, and sanction all individuals complicit with his subversion of Venezuelan democracy. So he's just, basically the same deal. He's saying, let's just go right back to Juan Guaido again and do that whole exercise. Obviously, Maduro, the Venezuelan government, is in a much stronger position than they were 4 or 5 years ago. They've tried all this, the geopolitical dynamics in the region and globally have shifted. There's much less interest in this among the more left-wing governments. I don't know where things are at. I know the Supreme Court, they began the Supreme Court process around the elections. I haven't seen much detail in exactly what's come out of that. But we'll see more on this in coming days and weeks. On the 14th, which I guess is on Wednesday, the Bolivarian Circle of Toronto, El Círculo Bolivariano Luis Riel Toronto, so the Louis Riel Bolivarian Circle of Toronto, is organizing a demonstration in front of Chrystia Freeland's office. So anyone who's in Toronto might want to check that out. I'm not sure exactly what the time was. I didn't write that down. I saw that online, or maybe I got it emailed to me by Maria Victor, a Toronto, Venezuela activist. The Financial Times published a story that said that Moscow's forces have secured almost double the amount of land Kyiv liberated in 2023. So in the first half of this year, they've apparently got more than twice the amount of land. And especially in the Donbass, I think the Russian troops have been on the advance. And obviously this week we saw that the Ukrainians, I think, responding to the fact that they are on the back foot on the battleground. They tried this effort, which I think was relatively successful. What I've heard is it's all very unclear, but at least 1,000 Ukrainian troops launched an operation into Russia in the Kursk region, and they've captured a bunch of villages, and I think some towns, bigger places, and quite a few Russians have had to flee. I think saw one that said 70,000. I think something else said maybe a bit more than that. So I think it's a big PR, certainly a big PR win. I don't believe that it's, they're going to hold this territory. It probably is quite successful in diverting some Russian forces to the defensive. Whether it's a dangerous gamble from the Ukrainian government standpoint with regards to diverting some of their resources, and also with regards to, I would assume, it just solidifies certainly Russian nationalism, solidifies Russia's sort of belligerence. It's a tricky position for the Ukrainian government, of course. So yeah, we'll see where that goes. I think it is dangerous. I think Michael Tracy, I believe, on X posted something to the effect of the NATO has backed an invasion and a capture of a chunk of Russian territory. This should be a question asked, or whether this is a good thing should be a question asked, or whether the U.S. supports this should be a question asked to all the presidential candidates in the U.S. And I agree with that. This does have, potential kind of escalatory dynamic to it. The Canadian, U.S., other media is, of course, not kind of highlighting that, but they're highlighting that this is a sort of big success by the Ukrainians. Whether it's a success that hides an underlying, sort of like a last-ditch bid to sort of shift the conversation from the loss that Ukraine's facing, I'm not exactly sure, but I think that's certainly a plausible looking at it. Adam Zivo, a National Post reporter who's been a lot in Ukraine and like other National Post commentators, he's quite right wing. He has this post which was getting his name right now, drew attention to on X about basically working with spies in Ukraine. So there's this stuff about a kind of, I guess, somebody who looked like a so some degree of a, wasn't sure if it was a approaching them because it was a sort of spy or from some country. And so Zivo says that in early 2023 in Odessa, somebody who he thought was a Chinese spy had kind of like reached out to him. And so he says, quote, I ended up organizing a small sting operation with two Ukrainian intelligence officers to figure out what his deal was. And so he meets this guy at a restaurant and sits next to the window so these Ukrainian intelligence officers can like listen in and this and that. Now, the point here that's interesting is this is a Canadian journalist kind of stating openly that he's kind of like working with the intelligence agency of the Ukrainian government. That's a bit of a reveal that, I think it has some political ramifications that he's clearly doesn't seem to think it has that matters that much. With regards to China, there's a story about Canada and Australia eyeing China signal more military cooperation. So Bill Blair, the defense minister, met with his Australian counterpart in Vancouver, and they basically discussed deepening ties, military ties, in the context of China, and the sort of the supporting this U.S.-led alliance targeting China. Also, with regards to the military side of things and the Canada-Australia ties to this, U.S., Canadian, Australian, and Filipino air and naval maneuvers on Wednesday, which they said was a show of force to promote the rule of law in the disputed South China Sea. And of course, the Chinese responded by some maneuvers of their own. So this is again part of this growing tensions in the region. Canadian government has been completely supportive of and pushing. In the Globe and Mail's business section, a further kind of confirmation. I've brought this story up a lot, but I think it really is worth remembering in this growing tension with China and understanding it, and of course, the China issue is going to keep going here, right? We're not. This is at some point, hopefully, the killing in Gaza stops, and let's hope that there's not the whole region being lit on fire. We'll get to that in a second. The China conflict is going to be, I don't see any off ramp here for years, maybe even quite honestly decades, but hopefully I'm wrong, but most likely we're going to continue growing tensions with regards to China. So it's important to keep all this to have a good, I think, understanding of the dynamics at play. The chief executive of the Toronto Stock Exchange had a piece titled in the business section of the Globe, New Foreign Investment Restrictions Put Canada's Mining Sector at Risk. And it's all about this basically pushing back by the Canadian mining industry about these strategic minerals restraints that have been brought in basically to target Chinese companies. And we've discussed this issue a bunch on previous sessions, so I'm not going to get into all the details. But this is again, indication of a couple of things. One, that the mining industry really is concerned about this. They see this as very much undercutting Canada as a global mining superpower, and that's a very important part of Canadian foreign policy. But here it goes beyond that into a whole just important part of Canadian capitalism. So you have the chief executive of the TSX penning this op-ed and basically saying that the TSX is as we know, mining companies are an important part of the TSX, and basically saying that these restrictions that are designed to align with the US empire's bid to contain China's rise, that this is a big threat to Canadian capital, Canadian capitalism, specifically mining companies, but more broadly the TSX. So it's a dynamic that's restraining the Liberal government from joining full-fledged in Washington's campaign. With regards to the Middle East, we're sort of in this, there's lots of violence going on, but we're in this sort of waiting pattern if there's going to be a major Iranian, Hezbollah, Yemen, other response to Israel's escalation. It appears that the Iranians are saying, still committed to the fact that they do need to respond unless there's an immediate ceasefire, that they do need to respond. The Iranians, I think, are divided on this. They're very worried about an attack on Israel that legitimates Netanyahu's aim, which is to try to draw the U.S. into a full-fledged war with Iran. And but we have forces in this country who are completely on board with the most fanatical violence of Iran or of Israel. So Jeremy Levy, the mayor of Hampstead, tweeted a couple of days ago, "Israel must strike first and strike hard, eradicating every security threat with relentless force. The mission must be relentless and unyielding until every adversary, including the civilian supporters, fully grasps the magnitude of their defeat. This is a battle for survival, and Israel must demonstrate unparalleled strength and resolve." Basically, blow the whole region up, blow up, kill, kill, kill. That's the position of the mayor of Hampstead, a well-to-do Montreal riding that's more than 3/4 Jewish. Levy is clearly a totally fanatical warmonger. Within Gaza, obviously, we saw a horrible massacre 48 hours ago where they killed another 100 plus at a school that was for displaced people who've been displaced, probably in many cases a dozen times, certainly multiple times. And there's all the horrible images of the body parts in bags and all this kind of horror. You have Smoldrich talking about how they should starve all, 2 million in Gaza, kill them all by starving them. Canada's response to this kind of horror is the ambassador in Japan boycotted the Nagasaki memorial, the city of Nagasaki's ceremony for the 79th year of the U.S. atomic bombing. They, in solidarity with the genocidal forces of Israel, they Ottawa boycotted this ceremony because the Nagasaki City Council or mayor, I don't know if it was council, the mayor who decides this, didn't invite the Israeli representative. They invited the Palestinian representative. So Canada boycotted that alongside the US and I think the other G7 countries, really just a further example of Canada's complicity in this Holocaust in Gaza. There was a post on the Canada in Ramallah X account, the Canadian representative to the Palestinian Authority, and it says, "We're helping female soldiers to keep the West Bank safe. Last month, Canada attended the groundbreaking of a new women's dormitory we are funding for the Palestinian Authority security forces. This will help them attend training and improve security for Palestinians." Who in their right mind would believe that supporting this Palestinian security force is enhancing security? What's the wording? Improving security for Palestinians. I mean, Israel's rampaging not just in Gaza, we're obviously the worst of it, but also killing all kinds of people in the West Bank. And the Palestinian security forces are doing absolutely nothing about it. In fact, they are enabling it. They are suppressing opposition to Abbas and to this corrupt, unelected, compliant, Zionist-aligned Palestinian Authority. This is just this is Canadian aid to Palestinians, right? This is what a lot of Canadian aid to Palestinians has been since 2007, which is building up a Palestinian security force to oversee Israel's occupation of the West Bank. And I've talked about this before, we have the internal government documents from the former head of the Canadian International Development Agency, Margaret Biggs, back in 2011, 2012, when they were this Harper government was threatening to cut off aid to the Palestinian Authority if they pursued their statehood bid at the UN. And the head of Canadian Aid Agency is saying the Israelis don't want us to cut off aid to the Palestinians because specifically the security funding that we're doing, the training, the assistance through Operation Proteus, this is serving their interests. This Palestinian security force is basically suppressing protests against Israel's horrors, and so this is what our aid is, and this goes with almost no comment in media or wherever about Canada's role with the US and UK and it's a military mission there still, right? As far as I know, I haven't seen any change in that as of maybe 6 months ago, last time I looked. Operation Proteus is still continuing. There's still maybe a dozen Canadian troops. It sort of oscillates between, I think, 10 and 20 Canadian troops. There's some Canadian Border Security Agency officials. There's been RCMP, sort of like 20, 30, depends on each time. Canadian security kind of personnel assisting the Palestinians, funding the PA training. Previously, they were training them in Jordan and a facility the Americans set up after invading Iraq to train Iraqi security forces. So this is an important part of the story of Canadian assistance to Israel. All the Palestinians are vetted by the Shin Bet, the internal Israeli intelligence agency. So it's like they're totally compliant in the face of ongoing settlement expansion, ongoing assaults, and the Palestinian security forces do nothing. So that's part of Canada's role in supporting Israel. Just today, it came out that the federal government announced a human rights commissioner, head of the new human rights commissioner, who was formerly the head of the Human Rights Commission, I think, in Yukon. And then he was like on the board in Alberta or something like that. He's been, he's sort of been in these positions, that he just resigned. And the reason he resigned is because the Zionist lobby began a whole smear of him a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago. And so now they got another one. They won another one, despite all the horrors we're seeing in Gaza. They're still able to exert that power within the Trudeau government. On the note of this type of buckling to Israel lobby pressure, presumably New Brunswick, they in Fredericton on the weekend, I believe it was, they had like half dozen different Ukrainian, I think there was a Somali, like cultural groups doing performances, like these like 5-minute performances as part of this New Brunswick Day event. And so they had a Palestinian dance group do I'm not sure if I pronounced correctly, the Dabke, well-known Palestinian dance. And then last minute, I think the morning of, they got contacted saying, nope, we don't want you to do this 5-minute dance, and who knows why, if some pro-Israel group found out about it or some bureaucrat got nervous or whatever. How dare there be an expression of Palestinian culture as part of this multi-nation cultural event. And this, as the genocide goes on in Gaza, we have that sort of genocidal type of policy around the Palestinian culture taking place here. Not the only example we've seen of that in recent months. Dimitri Lascaris posted on X that the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner reported that in 2023, that in terms of sponsored trips for MPs, that that Israel was number one. Not surprising. That's usual. Not 23 different MPs on a sponsored trip to Israel. In 2023, I think they said, I think Taiwan was number 2 at 18, and the next one was way down the list. That's been more or less the case since I've been sort of following this in the last 2 decades. Usually Israel's number 1 and Taiwan number 2 for sponsored trips for MPs. I talked about no, I think I'll leave that. On the note of the sort of Zionist fascism kind of theme, repression that we've brought up many times in recent sessions. Aaron O'Toole, the former head of the Conservatives, he had a piece in the National Post titled "Canada Can Combat the Insidious BDS Movement." And what's interesting about this piece is that he talks about the Bill C-70, this foreign interference bill. And this is really bad. Right? The more you see the more this gets referenced, the worse this all looks. And so in this piece, O'Toole says that the law criminalizes intentional interference with, quote, essential infrastructure. And then he says that, then he cites like what I'm not sure if I think it's what's in the legislation, or it's what his perception of legislation, but he's like, telecommunications, healthcare facilities, other public infrastructure like that. What O'Toole suggests that should be added to this list is school campuses. So the McGill field, the lower field at McGill, that nothing basically except for some squirrels really use, which where the student encampment was, that should be defined as essential infrastructure that under this new foreign interference legislation that would basically, I think there's life in jail. I think this legislation has life in jail. And so he's suggesting that we should turn these, like, the backfield at U of T, because the U of T encampment was like, I think that had been like closed down for like 4 years. There was like, the underground parking they were building or something like that. I forget I saw that. It basically had been mostly shut down for years. I went to University of Victoria, where their encampment was. It was a field. I don't know what was usually used there, but it clearly was to argue that was essential infrastructure that needed like potential life in jail if it was disrupted is beyond bananas. But this is what Aaron O'Toole is arguing in the National Post. These people, most of this is just at the level of like a rhetorical, like the actual institutional mostly don't actually move on these. Even the police, as repressive as the police force can be, they realize the kind of insanity of these Zionist appeals. But it still like floats around in the background and has the whole effect on the more over their policy. It does affect it, right? It maintains the diplomatic and other kind of support for Israel's horrors. It doesn't mostly translate into turning Canada into a totally authoritarian country like the extremist Zionists say they want. Whether they do want, whether Aaron O'Toole does really want to go all the way there, I'm not actually sure. But nonetheless, the head of McGill had Sani, the president, had a piece in the Montreal Gazette that the basic point was he doesn't, what students should he listen to? And like, who should he listen to on campus? And he's saying that there's all kinds of divergent opinion on campus, and I can't divest from companies because there's all kinds of different voices, and that's what makes the campus great, and on and on and on. Now, in November, in the biggest turnout in student union undergraduate referendum history, 78.7% of undergrads voted for boycotting companies and the like that were complicit in Palestinian dispossession, in supporting Israel. So that's, you're never going to get 100%. I agree. You're never going to get every student to agree on anything, but that is about as big a mandate from the student body as you can imagine. Now, this piece made me think about, so here you have the Montreal Gazette, and of course he never mentions the student referendum on this question. But it makes you think about the Montreal Gazette. So I bet the Montreal Gazette has published 100 at least 50, maybe 100 articles over the past what's it been since the first encampment started late April, I believe. Probably towards 100 articles on the encampment. I bet you there's no more. It wouldn't surprise me if there was zero, but my guess would be there's like 2 or 3 articles that have mentioned the student referendum. And even if some have mentioned the student referendum, my guess is that most of them haven't mentioned how overwhelming the student referendum was. And that's just a pretty extreme form of bias. You can have the president of the university talk about, well, I don't know what students to listen to because they're all so divided. That can seem like a sort of sensible argument when you just omit the fact that there's probably almost never been a stronger democratic mandate for a policy from the students in maybe in the history of McGill. I mean, there may be others, I don't know, but again, this is the highest turnout in this SMU, the union's referendum history, and it was 78.7, which is pretty high. Deborah Lyons, the special envoy to protect Israel from criticism, she has this piece, or she has this post about this piece in the medical journal of Canadian Medical Journal. I don't think it actually is a Canadian Medical Journal. Canadian Medical Association's journal, maybe it is. I don't think it was the CMJ, but I think it's Canadian Medical Association journal. And it's by this guy, Gil Kazman, who was a University of Toronto med student. And I think he might still be there, because on the University of Toronto, when I punched this guy's name in, and he's basically, his whole point of his piece is he's had to hide his Jewishness. He's had to hide his Jewishness in the medical world, because in the medical world, if you get tagged as being Jewish, everything collapses, and you have no career opportunities and all this kind of stuff. That's essentially what he's trying to say. Okay, now I punched the guy, and this is what Deborah Lyons said. Oh, it's so horrible to hear these terrible stories of the anti-Semitism in the medical world and da. Okay, so I punched the guy's name in, and on the U of T, the Temerity Medical School's website, Gil Kazman said, I think the first line in his bio is, he says, during my military service, I was exposed to the great work that medical teams provide. Okay, so your military service. Okay, so of course, this guy, I'm not 100%, I couldn't get this absolutely confirmed, but I'm basically 100%, this guy was in the Israeli military. Okay. So this is the guy who's complaining about having to hide that. On his bio, he talks about his military service. Almost anyone will know that means military service in the Israeli military, but he has to hide. It's so horrible, him having to hide his Jewishness and his whatever. Okay, now the University of Toronto in December, was it 555 Jewish faculty at the University of Toronto Medical signed a public letter, okay, saying that they want to be able to express themselves as Zionists, and it's so horrible. They have every right to express themselves as Zionists. And 555 Jewish faculty members. I would suggest that that is a slight Jewish overrepresentation at the University of Toronto Medical faculty. They didn't feel any need to hide. The headline, the title of the letter was something like University of Toronto Jewish Medical Faculty, da 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 da. Okay, so this notion that the Jewish medical faculty have to like hide and it's so horrible, it's just beyond ridiculous. And here you have the basically what they're saying is that there's some pro-Zionist, many, I guess, pro-Zionist Jewish faculty who are starting to feel uncomfortable because some of these students, and some of them, quite honestly, some other Jewish faculty members who are appalled by what Israel's doing, and we don't want to feel uncomfortable about our support for Israel slaughtering everyone in Gaza. I mean, that's essentially what they're saying. And this guy Gil Kazman reframes that in his column in the medical journal about how horrible it is to have to hide your identity of being a genocidal maniac. And then you have this special envoy, Deborah Lyons, posting about this grave instance of anti-Semitism in Canada. Now, in a more outrageous post or comment by Deborah Lyons, and this is crossing a threshold, and it's an interesting threshold that it crosses. Deborah Lyons, on the front page of Thursday's National Post, the headline is "Anti-Semitism Czar Ponders Role of Demographics." And so again, this is the, quote unquote woke Justin Trudeau, whatever woke means and this stuff, but the far right calls it woke. And I guess Polyev might call him that too. Say that Deborah Lyons tells the National Post that that basically the rise of anti-Semitism in Canada, what she really means is protests against the Holocaust in Gaza, that it's because of, quote, demographics and, quote, Canada's push for diversity. Okay, she's raising this in the National Post. And the National Post, of course, fully understands the implications of what she's saying. Basically, Arabs and Muslims, there's too many Arabs and Muslims in Canada, and that's leading to protests against genocide. That's what she's saying. That's how it's interpreted, particularly by the right-wing forces, by the anti-immigrant racist forces, but more generally. And this, again, is a government-funded special envoy supposedly to fight discrimination. She's crossing. Now, Deborah Lyons has been promoting anti-Palestinian racism. She has been promoting the horrors in Gaza, in both in indirect sense, in the sense she goes to Israel Walk and Israel flag ceremonies, and in the direct sense of when they that operation maybe 6 weeks, I think early June, when they killed 270 Palestinians, and they actually killed 3 Israeli hostages, but they got 4 hostages back. She celebrated that. She was like, "Oh, waking up this great news about 270 Palestinians killed," right? So she's directly justified or supported the slaughter, and then all the demonizing of those opposing the slaughter, all that, etc. Right? But what she's doing here is she's crossing a threshold, and this is an important political threshold. The racism abroad is much more acceptable than racism at home, right? And she is now turning her position into not just a tool of promoting apartheid and genocide, but being a tool of directly demonizing Canadian Arabs and Muslims. And she's doing that. I don't know how consciously. I don't know if she just got tripped up a bit in the interview. I don't know if she's testing the waters, what she can get away with in pushing this line. This is, of course, a line that is going, all the liberal Zionist world has gone more and more open racism in the recent months. You have, I'm just doing a piece on Lyons' thing. and I said a couple examples. So on Friday's Globe, you have Robin Urbach going on about how this homophobic attack in Halifax didn't get national attention because it was done by people who were, quote, Middle Eastern, right? So that basically media didn't want to make Middle Eastern, i.e. Arabs and Muslims, look bad, so they suppressed this discussion, right? You have the head of the Windsor Jewish Federation joking to the Canadian Jewish News about the agreement at the University of Windsor with the student encampment. He says the only thing they didn't get was, quote, Sharia law, right? Okay, the Arabs and Muslims are trying to enforce Sharia law in Canada on the University of Toronto. This is a constant theme on X of deport. Rebel News is pushing this deport Hamas. That's their theme. And so you have Deborah Lyons in this official Liberal government position taking up that rhetoric and pushing that racist far-right rhetoric. Now, we should point out that what's happened in the UK with these anti-Muslim white supremacist riots, there is a Zionist background to that. And I think there's two elements to the Zionist background. One element is this burst of Islamophobia and anti-Arab sentiment over the past 10 months by those justifying the unjustifiable in Gaza. Okay, so that's happening, and that obviously seeps into the body politic. But there's also another element that David Miller, the UK professor, has detailed, and he might be overplaying his hand somewhat here. I don't know enough to be sure one way or another, but I think he's certainly on to some important truths here. Is that there's like a direct that Tommy Robinson, the guy who's considered the sort of like the orchestrator, the instigator of a lot of this racist rioting in the UK, he's explicitly funded by these Zionist billionaires. So the one guy, American, actually funded back in 2017 a fellowship. So Tommy Robinson could be paid about $8,000 Canadian a month to work for Rebel News, right? For the Canadian far right, Ezra Levant's far right outlet. The Middle East Forum, which was Daniel Pipes, funded Tommy Robinson's legal campaign, I think in 2018, 2019, something like that. So there's this whole kind of like, of course, Ezra Levant had Tommy Robinson on a tour just like 2 months ago, right? He got arrested, and then it was a whole legal big ended up being a pretty big deal. So there is this alliance between Zionist organizations, funders, and now David Miller goes pretty far with it. He actually argues, and I really don't know if this is true. He argues that the basically the Tommy Robinson and stuff like this was and who of course is like a big supporter of Israel. He wears like an IDF shirt and stuff like that. Tommy Robinson. He says that basically pro-Israel funders kind of push this Tommy Robinson, the far right, pro-Zionist far right, as a to sort of try to marginalize the I guess more anti-Zionist, probably anti-Semitic as well, traditional far right in the UK. Again, I don't know enough to know the truth of this, if this is exaggeration, if there's a bit of truth and it's being too much emphasized. I don't know enough to speak with confidence on that. But I think it's pretty clear cut that there is a alliance. This is indisputable. There's pro-Israel funders that have supported far-right forces as part of stoking Islamophobia to serve Israel's interests. That I don't think is up for debate. Are there other capitalists and other wealthy and other like Ezra Levant, of course, was that whole ethical oil, right? So he's got a whole these Alberta tar sands industry funders and all, right? There's all these different forces, and it can be a little bit dangerous if you just get into isolating things too much as being just sort of pro-Israel or Jewish wealthy people funding this. I think it's a bit get in some murky territory there if you're like that. But nonetheless, there is a dynamic, and how far it should be investigated, pushed back against. Now, one thing is really clear cut, is that the establishment anti-racist organizations in Canada won't touch this issue. In fact, they try to suppress discussion of this issue, of the sort of ties between Zionist organizations and what we call maybe a more traditional white supremacist kind of milieu. And you see that online. There's big, real attacks against David Miller for some of his stuff on this recent stuff with Tommy Robinson. I should also point out that Tommy Robinson's English Defense League had a explicit relationship with Mayor Weinstein's JDL, Jewish Defense League, back in, I think, 2010, 2011. The EDL was only around for a short period of time. Now, so these anti-racist groups won't push back against it, and I think this is dangerous. As the liberal Zionist milieu becomes ever more openly racist and ever more aligned with the sort of fascist, with far right white supremacist forces, it's very dangerous that the official anti-racism groups refuse to touch this, to push back against the Zionist element in this. And I don't think it's impossible to see a situation where you had similar kind of riots in Canada, anti-Muslim white supremacist riots, and you have to ask yourself the role of Zionism in pushing all of that. Now, as part of this, the anti-racist organization, when I'm talking about anti-racist organization, Canada Anti-Hate Network, that's set up by Bernie Farber, of course. They refuse to really push at any of that kind of stuff. Anti-Racist Canada, what's it called? The Canadian Anti-Racism Foundation, groups like that. Okay, so those groups, they apartheid is not a race issue, right? Israeli apartheid is not a race issue for them. They ignore that. Now, we just had one of the biggest anti-racist victories in recent Canadian history, right? The Jewish National Fund, which is a explicitly racist organization, it practices discriminatory land use policies that were abolished in Canada 7 decades ago. The Canadian chapter of the JNF lost its charitable status. That was confirmed on Saturday. Okay, it was publicly announced, but it was solidified in the Canada Gazette on Saturday. So we'll get to that in a second. That is one of the biggest anti-racist victories in recent Canadian history. As far as I know, it's total silence from the mainstream liberal anti-racist organizations on the JNF revocation. Back in 2019, I wrote a piece about how all these establishment liberal anti-racist organizations had said nothing about the anti-JNF campaign. And so I reached out to all of them. I emailed them all asking, I haven't found anything about your comment on this. Would you want to comment on it? Only Anti-Racist Canada bothered to even respond. And he said he'd look into the matter, and then nothing ever appeared, right? So this is a real concrete example of these liberal establishment. Now, if you delve into the relationships, you find that a whole bunch of them, obviously Bernie Farber was one of the most important Canadian Zionists for many, many years, head of the Canadian Jewish Congress, ardent supporter of Israel. He's the one who set up Canada Anti-Hate Network. But then you look at some of the relationships, these researchers like Dan Colin, that is the guy here in Montreal, I'm forgetting his name right now. They work for United Jewish Appeal of Toronto, right? They work for the UJA Holocaust Museum. They did a whole initiative for UJA and stuff like that. So they have relationships to these pro-Israel Zionist organizations. So it's not a surprise that they wouldn't talk about Zionist racism. But it's important. Again, I want to repeat this in the context of these race riots in the UK, that connection between Zionism and stoking Islamophobia and stoking white supremacy, we certainly shouldn't ignore it. Now, on this, to move towards the positive, the Canada Gazette on Saturday reported, that's the official Canadian government publication, that the JNF's charitable status is revoked. That means that as of today, or as of Saturday, the JNF is not supposed to be able to provide tax receipts. Same thing with the Neiman Foundation of Canada, another Zionist charity that supports West Bank settlements and all these different fanatical groups in Israel. And that is a grassroots win back in January of 2023. Just Peace Advocates, Karen Rodman is the lead player here. She submitted a report. It was signed by some other people like Khalid Monmar and Rabbi Miviser. But it's Karen's is the researcher. She's the one that really drove the ship. We did action alerts. Canadian Foreign Policy Institute (JPA) did action alerts on that. We flooded the CRA with thousands of emails on Neiman. They got their charitable status revoked, so that is a victory. This is Neiman is not as powerful as JNF. And there have been other charities that have been revoked in the past, but I think this is pretty one-to-one. Very, very likely this is a reaction to the grassroots campaign, but also I think it's a bit of a tide shift. The union representing the 17,000 Canada Revenue Agency employees, they came out I think 4 or 5 days ago, just before the JNF thing was confirmed, and they said that they support the revocation of the JNF. So the CRA Employees Union basically was defending its members, presumably here. I don't know what happened internally here, but this is a very I never heard of this union, so I think it's not known as a left-wing union whatsoever. It's professionals union, so it's fairly elitist union. They came out defending that, and presumably what's going on there, they were defending their members who were trying to follow the law and uphold the charity rules on the JNF. I think this is a tide. There's a tide shift going on here within the CRA. There's a mix of things going on. Obviously, the grassroots work that a bunch of us have been doing on this charities issue for a number of years. The JNF thing, that's clear cut. That goes back decades, and the Palestinian Halifax, Ismail, I'm forgetting his name right now, who had his, he was driven from where Canada Park was built on the remnants of his family's home. That goes back many decades, and the JNF thing has been brought up many. But other issues, we've now been pushing on a whole bunch of fronts on the charity question, and that it seems to have been seeping through. There's a whole bunch of other factors. Some of the responses that Karen gets from the CRA, some of the shift in reporting that we've seen from a bunch of these pro-Israel groups, and this isn't just like, I'm not saying this just in the last 10 months, but we've seen this shift that's changed in the last year's reporting, pre-October of last year. And so they are clearly, the CRA is starting to ask more questions of these different charities. And now we have two examples, and important examples, of moving to that next step of the actual revocation. So this is really good. This is really, I think, really positive development. And now another part to this, and I may have mentioned it previously, but I'm going to repeat it if I did. The CIJA, B'nai B'rith, and Friends and Simon Wiesenthal Center have not come out defending the JNF. Well, CIJA was quoted in a National Post article defending the JNF, but I think that was basically the National Post reached out to them for a comment, and they did provide a comment. Those three groups have not said anything on Twitter. They've not put out any press release. And I think that's totally fascinating. They are boxed in by this issue. This issue, first of all, they have charitable status, and you probably could start looking around and find directly or indirectly they have charitable status. I believe CIJA is not actually a registered charity, but I believe CIJA gets most of its money, if not all of its money, from the federations, the Jewish federations, and the Jewish federations are a charity. So I'm not 100% sure that their money is tax receipted, but I believe it is. That's up for discussion. I'm not sure about that. But the basic point is that all those groups would be some degree vulnerable from CRA. But the bigger point is that they can't defend this. And they're boxed in because there's all kinds of very good nationalist, fiscal conservative reasons to be against this whole charity fraud of sending all this money to Israel. and a whole bunch of it is already violating current laws, as we've discussed many times. But even if they aren't violating current laws, the whole thing should just disappear. There's no reason why Canadians should be subsidizing a hospital in Israel. There's just no reason for it, or the symphony, or the Guide Dog Society, or whatever. It doesn't. None of it makes any sense. Israel's a very wealthy country. Let them, subsidize, have their own charitable status business. So it makes no sense. The more you look at it, the whole thing is a scandal. And I think Friends of Simon Wiesenthal, B'nai B'rith, CJ, they understand that. So what the pro-Israel groups, the way they seem to be trying to respond to this is there's the really unsophisticated and the slightly unsophisticated response. The really unsophisticated response, that Dalia Kurtz, this total wildly lying, quite honestly, pretty dumb Zionist Twitter person. What she says, and others in her milieu, she says, well, Sami Doun is the Canadian government hasn't moved against Sami Doun. There's a whole big right-wing attack against Sami Doun. They're going to ban Sami Doun and stuff like that. And both because she's willing to lie, and maybe because she's just dumb. I'm not really sure if it's hard to tease out which one's going on. She said, well, Sami Doun's a charity, and they're cutting off the JNF's charitable status, and Sami Doun, not Sami Doun. Well, Sami Doun, of course, is not a charity, right? They're just not. The Liberal government hasn't just criminalized them and put them on the terrorist list. There's a pretty big difference between the terrorist list and being a government subsidized organization. But that nuance is too much for her to understand. That's the really unsophisticated response. And the slightly unsophisticated response is coming from Warren Kinsella in the Toronto Sun, who over the weekend, he publishes this big long piece about how the JNF's charitable status is being targeted, and then cites all these Palestinian charity groups that have given these donations that are sort of questionable. And it's like a big long piece. It's like got to be 1,500 words. I don't know if they published the whole thing in the paper. And like in these examples the guy cites, it all sort of sounds impressive. When you read it, it's like the $14,000, this Palestinian charity, registered Canadian charity, gave $14,000 to this Palestinian group, and it's not clear what it was used for. Okay, and he lists like 4 or 5 of these types of examples. Again, it sounds impressive when you read it, and then if you go look at one of the more than 200 plus Israel-focused charities, one of these charities, you'll find it's way more scandalous what you can find in their books than all of these Palestinian charities that Kinsella is citing, right? And of course, we're talking about $500 million. When you really put it all together, we're probably talking $500 million that are supporting Israel from different charities, registered charities in Canada. So the less slightly unsophisticated, a bit more sophisticated than Dalia is to try to claim that there's all these like scandalous operations of Palestinian charities. There may be a few scandalous, and not even really, but let's even believe what Kinsella is stating. But it's nothing. It's not even a thousandth of the amount of resources, the amount of money, and the amount of scandal tied to the different Israel charities. So it's been interesting to see what further response we get on that issue from the pro-Israel lobby groups, which usually they denounce everything. Let's not forget, they denounce everything, but they don't want to touch this issue. They're clearly very scared by it. I've gone on too long again. Just end quickly. Lindsay Matheson, the NDP MP in London, Ontario, has this post where she starts off with Smoldrit's comment about starving 2 million Gazans, and then she just refers to it as genocide in this language. And the point here is that it's amazing, this language shift. Have you NDP MPs now just openly referring to a genocide? It's not even controversial. They don't even really get pushback from that, from the, go back a little while, and there would have been like press releases coming from CJ and B'nai B'rith, and to see the rhetorical shift of some of this stuff is very fascinating. Another thing is a story in the Maple titled "Political Staff Tried to Spin Israel Arms Data, Then Lied About Doing So." And the point here again is Global Affairs is trying to do what they can to continue allow the weapons permits that are already been out there to the Canadian companies to sell weapons to Israel. But they clearly are completely petrified by the public relations of all this. And, you know, I mean, well, obviously we're not just looking for public relations here, but the degree to which they're scared and are trying to like finagle the rules as a way of avoiding the controversy of what they're doing is a step forward. Two different ones here in Quebec. There was a press conference about the Quebec pension plan and their investments with companies assisting Israel that got good press. I think it was on Wednesday or Thursday. The press conference happened. There's a Jenna oh God, former Green MP Jenna Atkin. No, she didn't move over to the Liberals out in the Maritimes. I'm forgetting her name. Anyway, she sponsored a parliamentary petition around the Canadian pension plans investments. I don't know where that will go. And then the final thing I want to say on the resistance front, when Smoldritz made this crazy comment about starving, how it was morally okay to starve 2 million Palestinians, was what he said. But then he said, but the world won't let us do it. Okay, that's what he said. And as much as it seems hard to believe, considering how horrible what Israel's doing in Gaza, if it wasn't for these protests, they would be doing even more. What they're doing would be even worse, right? And so there's not much comfort that comes from that. But you know, if they've killed 200,000 already, which is probably, and you put all the deaths together, it's probably we're in that kind of range. They may well have killed 400, 500,000 if there wasn't this mass resistance. So I think I'll leave it at that, and I'll make Laura a co-host, and I've unmuted you, and I'm just going to make you co-host, and people can make comments or questions or whatever.
Okay, let's let Lynn go ahead first. Lynn, can you please unmute yourself? I don't know, I can't seem to unmute Lynn.
I just did. You just
Okay, great.
So
Lynn?
then one would ask Smotrich, why does the rest of the world not want you to kill all the Palestinians, starve them to death? Why does the rest of the world not want to stop you?
You kind of cut out a little bit, Lynn. Can you?
To the extent I understood your question, he's saying the rest of the world has stopped Israel. He's saying if it was up to me, this is the right thing to do, to starve them all. But it's not up to me. The rest of the world has blocked us from doing it.
Yeah. Well, the question from me to Smotrich, why do you think the rest of the world has stopped you from doing it? Because it's the wrong thing to do. I mean, he admitted it himself.
Yeah, well, he's not saying it's wrong. He's saying he's right to want to do this.
And the rest of the world is wrong.
Yeah, he's speaking to, I presume, I don't know exactly where he's speaking to, but I think he was speaking to he's the reasonable person in that crowd, the even crazier Zionists, and he's trying to explain to the even crazier Zionists why they haven't done the full business of killing everyone in Gaza. So.
Okay, so I guess I'm up next, Steve. I have a question. It's about the tactics that we're using. I was told this made recently. I'm in a Muslim women's activist group, even though I'm not Muslim. But I watched how people within that group on WhatsApp were reacting to this kind of disruption that some Muslim women did when Kamala Harris was in Michigan. These were women from the No Commitment group, and they just got up and they chanted no to genocide or something like that. And so there were Muslim women group in this activist group saying how they found them rude and they shouldn't have been so rude. And, they're going to turn people against us. And I was just wondering, how do you react to that when people say that to you, that in fact the disruptions might have the contrary effect to one that you might want? And I was wondering if you've ever found any good research on the different tactics we have used and sort of their effectiveness, their impact.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is a fundamental truth in the fact that most people don't like disruptive tactics. And heckling is quite honestly a very low-level disruptive tactic. I mean, shutting down the port or blocking a highway or whatever, or a strike, a labor strike, shut down a general strike, whatever, on and on. So that's just reality. That most of the public reacts negatively to this kind of stuff. And as you're pointing out, even presumably fairly pro-Palestinian Muslim women. And those types of tactics are largely a reflection of our lack of power, right? We turn to those tactics because you can't get an op-ed in the New York Times saying that Kamala Harris is enabling the genocide, right? Like it'd be better if we could get an op-ed in the Toronto Star or the whatever, right? But we can't because the power system is against us. So we are forced into tactics where there is we shouldn't deny that it rubs a lot of people the wrong way. Does it advance our cause? Unequivocally. And there's tons and tons of evidence about where social movements are disliked. Those doing the thing are disliked, but the subject becomes popular, right? That the idea seeps into the conscious mind. The one, I think, I don't know where, I just read an op-ed kind of discussing some of this stuff, and they talk about the civil rights movement in the US and all the polling about like the bus boycott stuff, or the counter going to the racist counters, and black people going in and trying to get served and stuff like that. The polling all showed most Americans didn't like that. 70% of people were like against the civil rights movement. But the issue, the substance seeped into, and then it played itself out within the political structure. Now, we shouldn't respond to that by being like, okay, well, we just don't care if it elicits backlash. We should be completely unwilling to hear arguments about this rubbing people the wrong way. I think the issue that does that the most, obviously, would be a lot of the climate stuff, where they go and put, on these art things, and you go put ketchup or whatever, all they're particularly big in the UK, totally blanking on their name. And it elicits this crazy backlash and da-da-da. I personally am with them. I think that the climate emergency is so horrible, and it's just moving along, and the whole political structure is just absolutely unwilling to respond. And so you just need to do something that elicits, attention on the issue, and understanding that a lot of people don't like that you go and disrupt the tennis match with whatever, the Wimbledon with the, what. Anyway, so I think we are where we are in terms of our relationship to power, I think that now getting into how do you quantify each specific tactic, and how do a sort of a scientific study, that's really difficult to kind of to pull off.
Wouldn't have to be a quantity. I'm just wondering if there's any solid research, and you can't generalize that it would be effective in different instances, but I just wondered, because I wanted to counter this, because what these women were saying, I thought essentially is that we should be more, we should be more polite, we shouldn't be rude. But the fact of the matter is, it's like people telling the Palestinians, why can't you be more like Mahatma Gandhi? You should be nonviolent, as though they haven't been nonviolent most of the last 70 years. And, we all know what happened in the 2018 Great March, when they set snipers on nonviolent protesters. So to me, it was just like they're, I don't know, it was too bad, because I felt like they were sort of winning the argument a little bit, and I wasn't engaging in it. But I think that maybe it's also a cultural thing about sort of being impolite or something. I don't know, but they definitely didn't like it.
To me, the obvious response is that we would have heard nothing about. Harris will do everything she can and just not talk about Palestine.
Yeah.
But in this that was forced onto the issue. The protest was wildly successful. Obviously, it was wildly successful. Even the fact that they were talking about it, like she just wants to speak about, the issues that she wants to speak about, and completely ignore that issue and have like the U.S. enabling a genocide with like that's not part of the election discussion. That would be her preference, right? So I think that in that instance, it's not like there's some other instances of disruptions where I think it's a bit more of an up in the air of whether this was all good or bad, or how is it 60% good and 40% bad? In that case, we're talking about like a 95-5. Yeah, okay, maybe there were some Harris supporters at the event that were like, a little bit whatever, but they got her to screw up. I mean, she screwed up by doing this whole like I'm speaking now and whatever, and then she had to kind of even back away from that. The next day or a day later, she then tries to kind of like, not like indirectly, but she sort of does this whole language about I want to make it clear, right? And so no, they were that instance is just an unequivocal success.
So
So
Eves, the next day she wanted a ceasefire. What's a ceasefire? Nothing. We want a solution. So
Okay, I'm gonna, just because we've got quite a few questions.
yeah, I totally agree with you that I agree with you that we're like those are too minimal, right? But like, it's better that she calls for. I read that piece from what's her name in Australia. Is it Diana? Not Diana Jones. She's not on X. Anyway, she makes the joke. It's a big piece about joking about the ceasefire language, and she's about like giving the kids to the hyenas. I don't know if anyone saw that, but I agree with the basic point here that Donald Trump celebrates the killing of Palestinian children, and Biden and Harris they support the killing of Palestinian children, but then provide this rhetorical, like they're concerned about the killing of Palestinian children as they are in this analogy, as they are putting the children down to give into the hyenas to eat. Okay, so I agree with that. I think that's a very good. It's a way of conceptualizing this issue that's creative and important. But having said that, I still think there is something that part of the global power structure and how global politics work. Rhetoric and the diplomatic rhetoric does play a role in what Israel can get away with. Obviously, stopping the bombs is far more important than a rhetorical whatever, but the rhetorical is not zero. Anyways, but yeah, sorry.
Okay, go ahead, Ali.
Hi, thanks, Eve, for your presentation. Appreciate it. I wanted to ask you a couple of questions. I wonder if you could share some thoughts. The first one is in relation to the JNF charitable status. Do you think that this is some type of appeasement tactic from the government of Canada or CRA, similar to, how the rape story came out from Israel about the Palestinian detainees? And they thought that, okay, too much information is being leaked. We need to do something for the optics. So they went in, caused this spectacle, arrested a few guys, and then released them. The world thinks, okay, the Israeli army is actually doing something about this, but nothing's changed. The rapes and the humiliation continues. As you mentioned, there are 200 plus charities in Canada who are Israel focused. And as you mentioned that B'nai B'rith hasn't really come out openly to defend JNF. So do you think this is some sort of an appeasement tactic? They're not really going to go after the 200 plus charities. They'll maybe take away tax status for a few of them, and people will think, okay, something's been done. That's one. If I could ask both of them together, you could respond. The second one is in relation to the propaganda warfare that we're seeing in Canada. So you mentioned Dahlia. Okay, that's one person. Sun Media's Brian Lilly is another, and the whole Rebel News gang. I mean, these people lie and propagandize things day after day. Why isn't, like, we have laws in this country for hate speech and for, propaganda. The kind of rhetoric that they put out is really harmful, and it shapes people's perceptions, for the worst. So I would like to get your thoughts on why hasn't there been any kind of punitive activity against them from a legal perspective? Thanks.
Yeah, I think on the legal stuff, I mean, it depends. There are some stuff on X that it clearly would probably contravene hate speech laws. But most of it, while clearly inciting racism, it doesn't necessarily cross the threshold of hate speech. And I think that's good. I think that it's good to have we don't have this sort of like full freedom of speech the US has, where there is some restrictions, but I think that we don't want we want that bar to be pretty high, as much as I don't like, on the JNF, no, that is not. I agree with you. That's what happened with Israel, and clearly, I mean, the Israeli official was even was it the judge advocate of the Israeli military I saw actually basically stated we have to we have to go after these people who are involved in rape, so we can continue raping in other measures, because the international criminal court's looking at us and stuff like that. That's basically stating it publicly. So I totally agree with you. That's what's going on with the thing about arresting those Israeli soldiers. Now, on the JNF, no. On the JNF, this is something that's been in the works for a long time. And I think this is I don't think the Justin Trudeau government has very little to do with this. Maybe there's some, somebody
There's
maybe,
something wrong with your sound now, Eve.
yeah, I'm hearing some background, but yeah, maybe somebody needs to just, I think it's better now. The JNF thing is something that's clearly been in the works for a long time. It's possible that there's somebody towards the upper echelons of the bureaucracy that has some ties to the Trudeau government that has shifted a bit within the CRA to allow a little bit more upholding of the rules. But I don't even think that's what's going on. I think what's going on is basically the campaigning on this issue was going on for so long. The evidence is so overwhelming. The JNF is breaking every single rule. Okay, they're supporting settlements contrary to CRA. They are supporting the Israeli military contrary to CRA. Their finances are a mess. They're doing a very poor job on that front. And then they're also racist, right? And that also contrary to CRA. So that there's been campaigning going on for decades and decades. It picked up. It got evidence being presented more clear cut, and then simultaneously within the bureaucracy, and then it was also the more general campaign that's been going on about the charities, and then within the bureaucracy you also have there's like the University of Ottawa and Carleton have had pro-Palestinian activism for the past 20 years. There's been pretty good activism. Well, where do most of these CRA employees, people at the
You're really cutting out, Eve. Are you sure you don't have a connection problem?
I could. I don't know.
Oh.
I'm hearing some weird background noise.
Yeah, there's nobody unmuted. It's like everybody's muted.
I think people are going muted and unmuted, like muted.
Yeah, we really can't hear you now. Unfortunately.
Okay. Let me just try something here. Is it better now? Can you hear me now?
Well, no, not really.
Okay, well, I guess maybe we just end it then.
Oh, now we can hear you. No.
Okay, but yeah, so this is something going on within the bureaucracy, and I should say that I don't know what you heard about this, but Carleton and U of O have had pro-Palestinian movements for the past 20 years, significant ones, and they're the people who go into the CRA bureaucracy, who are doing these jobs at the charity directorship, looking at these charities. I bet you a large number of them have gone through Carleton or U of O, and they get exposed to some of the Palestine solidarity activism, and they look at these charities, and if you go back 10 years, they were like, oh no, I don't want to do this. I get in trouble politically. I don't want to touch this charity. It's powerful. Da 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 da. And now you have this more Palestine consciousness, and then on top of that, maybe in the past 10 months, though I really do believe this is something been in the works for many years, many years, this audit process with the JNF has been going on for many years. Not with Neiman Foundation, that's a quicker thing, but it's much less powerful. JNF is a very powerful charity. And so then the horrors of the last 10 months come in, and then you're somebody in the bureaucracy and you're like, right, and you just take the next step. That'd be my my guess at how it plays out. But mostly what this is about is just upholding the rules. It has, my guess, very little to do with official policy directives from on high.
Okay, go ahead, Bruce, and sorry I had lowered your hand. Go ahead.
Oh, hello. Can
Yeah.
you others hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you for all the work you do, and just inquiring about the Bangladesh issue and the coup d'état that happened there. I don't know if you are going to do a report, maybe a YouTube clip on that, but I'd sure like to know a little bit more. The issue with some of the with supposedly NED, the National Endowment for Democracy, having their hands in the issue and influencing the situation in for the students in Bangladesh, in Dhaka. So I just wanted to know, and what presently is happening with the ousted prime minister. I guess she's in India, or I don't know, places unknown. I have no idea.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm sure you know more than me. I really haven't followed it hardly at all. I've just seen the sort of headline stuff about people being. I just been too many different issues to cover, and then family stuff. But I haven't really. So if anyone else has more to add on that, go ahead.
I'll just say that you've probably seen it, Bruce, but there have been quite a number of articles coming out recently in the last few days on this, and I could try to find them and send them to you next week if you like, but you may have already seen them.
I saw there's some stuff about saying that there's like the National Endowment for Democracy kind of role, but I haven't sort of delved into it. But
okay, go ahead, Nahid.
Okay, thank you. Just 2 points. Just recently came back from vacation. We were doing a cruise from Amsterdam to Norway. And what I learned, which maybe you all know, where are the Israelis? They are cruising. They're cruising around. What happened that I noticed that there is a exhibition for Israeli artists on the cruise boat. And so I went to complain to the director of their art gallery. And I was saying, I mean, don't you know about ICJ and ICC? I mean, I know you're on water, but on the land, crimes are happening. And so the guy couldn't defend himself. But what happened, and my husband and I were surrounded by all these Israelis that they're extremely aggressive, entitled, felt very entitled. And anyway, I made my point. I stood my ground. But it's interesting that the Israelis are out of Israel, those obviously with money, and just cruising around. That was confirmed by other people. So this cruise was part of my retirement, retiring from academia, a professor of medicine. And I can tell you, for 40 years, the culture atmosphere and the power in medicine academia is completely under the control of the Jewish people. I won't say that they are all Zionists, but those who are Zionists, they also overpower the other Jewish people. And what you learn from medical school that there's a power differential, and if you really want to advance, you should know the rules of the game and be accepted to the network, because otherwise you can't get a grant, you can't get an opening for a position, you will not be nominated, you may not even when apply for promotion to professorship be accepted. So this issue of Jewish power in medicine is very strong, but I won't say all of them are Zionist. So that's my 2 points. And a question: do you know why Elon Musk is supporting Trump by any chance?
Well, the first thing, I mean, I think it's totally insane that this person has this op-ed in the Canadian Association of Medical Journal and complains about having to hide being Jewish and this and stuff. I mean, it's just like, it can't be taken seriously, as you kind of point out with, Canadian Jews are far overrepresented in the medical world. And when you have 555 Canadian Jewish or University of Toronto Jewish doctors basically complaining they can't support Israel's violence publicly, it's a joke. But I don't really know why Elon Musk is pro-Zionist or pro-Trump. He's pro-Zionist as well. He's gotten a whole relationship with Netanyahu. My understanding is that he used to fund Democrats, and I saw some story, I think it was a New York Times story that said that, so he funded Democrats, and he said he voted Democrat. I think he voted for Biden, and he said he did. And there was a push there's some big electric car push that the Biden administration instigated, and the UAW, United Auto Workers, basically didn't want Tesla to be part of it, because Tesla's all non-union, and if he's very, my understanding is Musk's quite an anti-union guy, and which is most capitalists are, but especially capitalists who don't have unions. They usually once they have unions, sometimes they figure out you can work, but anyways, Biden, in this initiative for the electric car, he excluded Tesla, and apparently in this New York Times story, even like Biden made these not only excluded Tesla from like whatever this initiative was exactly, but even like he put out these comments where he like lauded General Motors for their electric cars, and in fact, like General Motors had like produced at that point, I don't know, like 5,000 electric cars, whereas Tesla had produced, let's say, 2 million electric cars in the US. I don't know what the exact numbers were, but it was like really, really out of proportion. And apparently, according to this story, Musk was very much offended by not being excluded from it, and then even sort of at the rhetorical level. And so I don't know how much money this cost him, being part of the initiative or not being part of the initiative. I don't know like what it meant in dollars and cents, but I guess it probably meant something. So that's what they were claiming. The other issues of him being like all the business about, I know he's in a big fight with his son who transitioned, and there's something there, and he feels like he was convinced into agreeing to the transition. I saw some story about that. So I don't know what role the cultural things play. Musk comes from this, South African family, apartheid white. I don't know enough of the guy's background to know, this or that. Yeah. But
Okay, we're down at 7:30 now, Eve, so I think we might have to cut it off here. Thanks, everyone. Thanks very much, Eve.
yeah, thanks.